Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Dunley, and I want to thank you for joining this webinar being hosted by both the EcoAction Committee of the Green Party of the United States and also the Green Peace Action Committee, and as part of our Earth Day to May Day activities taking place from Earth Day, April 22nd to May 1st, and designed to sort of highlight the interconnection among many issues, and that we're never going to solve climate change unless we also solve the problems of racial and economic justice. And we need system change, not climate change. And certainly it was suggested that one of the things we should talk about is the connection between military and the climate. Obviously, the military is the biggest user of fossil fuels worldwide. Many of us, of course, have fought for many years against the strategy of the United States going to war for oil, particularly in the Middle East, but also in other fights we have with places like Venezuela. But then also increasingly understanding that climate is even recognized by the Pentagon for many years as the single greatest threat to national security. I'm trying to figure out, maybe Michael can help with this, not seeing the button to record. So if we could figure out the record situation, that would be great. Though I guess actually now we're doing live stream, we may not need recording. So the idea that with climate change, we're going to see increased competition for access to food, access to water, access to resources. Syria, obviously a very complicated situation. Climate change was not the only factor, but much of the climate crisis that resulted from that, particularly going into Europe, was because so many of the people in rural communities were forced off their land due to an historic drought. And that was just like sort of the final match to do the other pending tinderbox in Syria. But we've also seen it more recently in South America, in Guatemala and other places where people have been forced to try to migrate to the United States. So that's why we decided to do the Climate Refugee. We have an all-star lineup. We're going to be hearing from David Swanson, who is executive director and co-founder of World Beyond War. I'll give a little bit more of an introduction. Madelyn Hoffman, who is running for governor of New Jersey Peace Action, but was the longtime executive director of the New Jersey Peace Action. In fact, I know Madelyn when we were both organizers together, community organizers in Iowa for Acorn in the late 70s. And then we have Delilah Barrios, who is a member of the Texas Greens and also a member of the Latinx and Indigenous Caucus, a healthcare worker, mother, activist, and artist. And you can find out more about Earth Day to May Day on the Green Party webpage, gp.org, or at the EcoAction Facebook page. I don't know if there's anybody from GPAC wanted to say a few quick words. If not, I'm going to turn it over.
Yes, I can say a few quick words about GPACs, Mark. Okay. I'm one of the co-chairs of GPACs and have been since last year. And we're the committee of the Green Party of the United States is most directly concerned with war and peace issues in the United States and overseas. We are working to plan and achieve peace and justice, the peace and justice action proposals adopted by the Green Party of the United States. We have a website for GPACs. And we also support and promote the party's anti-war candidates and agenda. And I'm really excited that we are working together with EcoAction, because especially on this issue, we need to be working together. Those who are looking for a clean environment, on the sustainable environment, and those working for peace and justice.
We are asking people to keep on mute if you're not speaking, because some speakers like Madelyn just now do have a little bit of feedback problems. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to David Swanson, who's an author, activist, journalist, radio host, co-founder, and executive director of World Beyond War and campaign coordinator for RootsAction.org. I believe David was also part of the Green Shadow Cabinet, and he's been a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and was awarded the 2018 Peace Prize by the United States Peace Memorial Fund. And World Beyond War is an international anti-war organization in about 24 countries, a global nonviolent movement to end war and establish a just and sustainable peace. And David, I have made you a co-host in case you have some PowerPoint you need to share.
Thanks, Mark. Let me know if anybody can't hear me or if the PowerPoint doesn't work. My bio doesn't go back far enough, but I also was once employed by Acorn, as I think most good people were. Now, maybe not everyone, but let me try sharing screen and see if you all can see this. Can you see a big red rectangle?
You see war in the environment, David Swanson.
War in the environment. There we go. So Earth is dying. President Biden intends to ask various money lenders to put poor countries deeper into debt to help. Better than nothing, right? He also intends to spend $1.2 billion on climate aid to poor countries. That's that little blue rectangle on the left. That's great. $1.2 billion. I could put some really great solar panels and windows on my house, but the world is a little bit bigger than one house. And just for perspective, and not to mention contradictory results, consider that the US government in 2019, according to USAID, handed out $33 billion in economic aid plus $14 billion in so-called military aid. Biden also plans for the US government to spend $14 billion on the climate, which compares rather unfavorably with $20 billion that the US government hands out every year in fossil fuel subsidies. Those are those two teeny little blue bars on the left and in the middle. But there's, and that doesn't include livestock subsidies, but never mind the $1,250 billion that the US government spends every year on war and war preparations. That's the big blue rectangle on the right. The president also says he wants to reduce US emissions 50 to 52% by the year 2030, which sounds super fantastically better than nothing, right? But the fine print not found in the US media reports includes that he actually means reducing 2005 levels, so about the highest, the worst year you could pick, by 50 to 52% by 2030. And totally missing from all reports, the invisible print that environmental activists know from past experience to object to includes such slimy practices as excluding from the calculation any emissions from imported goods, from international shipping and aviation, from the burning of biomass, that's wonderful green stuff, plus the omission of predictable feedback loops, plus building into the calculations the benefits of imaginary future pro-climate technologies. These are all some of the reasons that people dumped wheelbarrows full of BS as close as they could get to the White House this week. And then there are the things that even the environmental activist organizations tend to go silent on, often including livestock, almost always including militarism, which is generally excluded from climate agreements and even from discussions about climate agreements. So here's a 1.5-minute video introduction to this problem.
Did you know
that the launching of wars by wealthy nations in poor ones does not correlate with human rights violations or threats of terrorism, but does strongly correlate with the presence of oil? Wars fought for oil also burn huge quantities of it, and that's just the beginning of the damage. Wars in recent years have rendered large areas of the earth uninhabitable and generated tens of millions of refugees. War and war preparations damage the environment through the production and testing of nuclear weapons, the aerial and naval bombardment of terrain, the dispersal and persistence of landmines and buried ordnance, and the use and storage of military despoliants, toxins, and waste. As the environmental crisis worsens, thinking of war as a tool with which to address it, treating refugees as akin to military enemies, threatens us with the ultimate vicious cycle. Declaring that climate change causes war misses the reality that human beings cause war, and that unless we learn to address crises non-violently, we will only make them worse. Learn some new approaches and what a fraction of military spending could do if redirected to protect. Did you see if I can get to the next slide there? War and preparations for war are not just the pit into which trillions of dollars that could be used to prevent environmental damage are dumped, but also a major direct cause of that damage. The US military is one of the biggest polluters on Earth. Since 2001, the US military has emitted 1.2 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases, equivalent to the annual emissions of 257 million cars on the road. The US Department of so-called Defense is the largest institutional consumer of oil in the world, the largest global landholder. And by one estimate, the US military used 1.2 million barrels of oil in just 1 month. One military estimate in 2003 was that 2/3 of the US Army's fuel consumption was in vehicles delivering fuel to the wars. Some of us struggle to educate on and actually implement laws against war and genocide, of which ecocide is a close cousin and ought to be recognized and treated as such. Here are a few ideas of things that you can do to advance the needed education and activism. First, join the Russian and United States NGO initiative to plant a tree for peace on April 25th. Happens to be today, but you can create similar initiatives on future days and plant your own trees at any time. There's a webinar coming up on April 29th. By the way, all of the links to all of these things are at worldbeyondwar.org or davidswanson.org. There's a webinar coming up called Militarism and Climate Change Disaster in Progress, April 29th. There is an online course, 6 weeks in-depth, experts from around the world, participants from around the world, optional assignments, learn all about war and the environment in this online course. Starts June 7th. Page full of resources to which we keep adding anything we can find: books, videos, films, fact sheets, PowerPoints about war and the environment at worldbeyondwar.org/environment. There's a petition that a number of organizations set up a while back and still building to John Kerry and the US Congress: stop excluding military pollution from climate agreements. You can sign that. You can sign a similar letter to John Kerry that Veterans for Peace drafted, which you can find at veteransforpeace.org. And stealing this graphic from the Green Party, you can work to demilitarize the Green New Deal. Talk with every advocate for a Green New Deal about where the money could come from and about the green good that could be accomplished directly by defunding militarism.
So, David, I believe that's your finished.
Yeah, unless you have questions or want me to keep talking, I can go for hours.
We're going to take the questions after all the presenters. I'm going to, because we had a little sound problem earlier, I'm going to ask Delilah Barrios, who's the Green Party of Texas, to be our next speaker. Let's see.
So you want me to go next?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. Let me screen share with you guys. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, I can see it. Well,
Okay.
I can see you.
Oh, you cannot see my screen yet? Hold on. Sorry. Let me fix that. I wasn't ready.
Sorry.
That's okay. Just a second. Video. Anything yet? I think you have to allow me to screen share.
You are co-host. You should be able to screen share.
Okay. Okay. How's that?
It's now starting to screen share, it says. Exploitation, imperialism, and its effect on migration.
Correct. Okay. Thank you for giving me this time to speak on the military and the environment. As you can tell, I had titled mine Exploitation of Imperialism and Its Effects on Migration. Just want to touch base on a few things. You can see Vietnam, lush tropical green area, left a large toll on the environment, the war, and land was turned from mush to the stomping feet of marching armies. Water systems polluted, both on purpose and accidental, as well as whole forests and jungles being destroyed by fires, explosions, and the constant human exposure. So obviously the war changed the landscape pretty desperately. As you can see, images of all the destroyed trees, impoverished people, and let's not forget the generations of poison left to the Vietnamese people from exposure to Agent Orange. So November 1st, 1955 to April 30th, 1975, some of the statistics. So we've got 2 million civilians died on both sides, decimated 5 million acres of forest, 500,000 acres of farmland. And the amount of money that was spent, I think last I checked was about 4 billion. So I mean, these are older examples of war. We're not even getting close to what we're dealing with now. So these are some old photos of China, landscape, culture, the Civil War from 1927 to 1950. Get a whole lot of different images from that time. One thing that I wanted to note about China is that, again, the military spent excessive amounts of funds with their agenda. And if you think about the amount of money that was spent and the amount of loss of life, it seems like there's no other agenda than to destabilize the region. And from that war, there was, of course, a lot of immigrants who moved to the US to escape the pressures of poverty and oppression, which is very understandable. And I think that if we don't look at the context of our involvement, at least from the US, in things like this, we'll never get beyond making the same mistakes again. So that's why I'm trying to just highlight some of these historical events. Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara, anti-imperialist, hero of the people. I mean, he's well remembered for his efforts to become self-sustainable and, you know, less consumption of goods and services. And he's actually an idol of mine, so I hope nobody judges me for that. And then, of course, we've got Bolivia. These are some natural wonders of Bolivia. Some really, I got these images from a tourist site because obviously they want people to come and enjoy the beauty of the state, but they don't seem to be, I mean, without support of indigenous peoples, these places will not exist anymore. According to Wikipedia, Bolivia has experienced over 190 coups since 1825. As you can see, there's an indigenous woman holding a flag, obviously suffering many indignities and pain from the military presence. And yeah, just read some of these quotes real quick from Stephen Kinzer. Access to resources continues to be a major motivator for U.S. support of right-wing regimes. Bolivia has one of the world's largest supplies of lithium, the key ingredient in electric cars and smartphones. Some have called it the gold of the 21st century. Morales' government was trying to set up a publicly owned lithium industry, which would have kept more of the wealth created by the natural resource in the country instead of in the pockets of foreign investors. Biden has increased the military budget by $12 billion. It is higher now than it was at the peak of the Vietnam War, with consideration to inflation. In the wake of such civil unrest nationally as the Derek Chauvin murder trial, one would hope the new administration's focus would be to work towards health and wellness, methods to address racial disparities, exploitation of communities of color, segregation, or furthering of white supremacy. Time and again, we see the disregard for people of color, migrants, or refugees. We could afford to house and provide for every person, yet it is a habit of the U.S. Department of Defense to continue the oppression and exploitation of people and their resources. There are many examples, those of which I just showed you. Again, this all predates the Iraq War, which apparently they say ended in 2011. But as we all know, the aggression against the Middle East continues on. So one of the largest polluters on the planet is the American military, as David pointed out, not only in carbon from fuel, but supplies, materials. It exacerbates the loss of biodiversity, which increases infectious diseases. Whereas the various defense mechanisms of the United World should prioritize climate action, they are ever occupied in their conquest for ultimate power. In my humble opinion, this preoccupation of force has only been a detriment to our continued peace and survival on this planet. Climate change will and has exacerbated human migration. So with the global temperatures rising and natural disasters occurring more frequently as a result, many people from all over the globe will suffer the fate of loss of resources and stability, people who otherwise would be well equipped to provide for themselves if it were not for the exploitation of their resources and excessive military presence. It is my hope that citizens will support efforts to defund the military to reallocate those resources towards peace and preservation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Delilah. Our next speaker is Madelyn Hoffman. And as I said, she's the Green Party candidate for governor of New Jersey. She has previously at least once run for United States Senate. I think for 18, 19 years, she was head of New Jersey Peace Action and did a lot of work early on in her career fighting garbage incineration, I believe in the ironbound neighborhood of Newark.
Yes, and I hope that my sound quality is okay. I've been trying everything in my power to get it to improve. Mark, yes, we met each other in 79 or 80, something like that. So it's interesting to see how over time our concerns have remained the same. And some of the things we've been involved with have been different. I did run for U.S. Senate in 2018 against Senator Menendez, and then I ran again for U.S. Senate as a Green in 2020 against Senator Cory Booker. And each time my platform was heavily centered on the issue of military spending and war, because both of those senators I've never seen a military budget they don't like or a war they don't like, at least as senators. So what I wanted to talk about today very briefly is how many wars we're involved in, where we're involved in those, how much money we're spending, and what the impact is on human life and on the environment. Because generally speaking, when we talk about war, we talk about human cost and we talk about monetary cost. We've talked some about the monetary cost already. Since 9/11, we've spent over $6 trillion on these wars that we're involved in now. And these wars we know of are in Afghanistan, Iraq. I don't know why that study said the war in Iraq was over in 2011, because it's still raging on. 2011, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen, where the impact on the environment is only the famine, and the impact of war on the environment is only making things worse. I'll speak a little bit lower. I've been concerned about my sound quality, so I'll lower my volume. So we are in 5 other countries with overt military actions, besides the 4 that I mentioned. We're 79 countries where the military's so-called counterterrorism actions, efforts rather, and then there are 7 countries where we have used drones and other sort of aerial bombings, and 41 countries where we've run military exercises, and obviously, or something that more commonly known is more than 800 countries. There are over 800 countries, no, 800 U.S. military bases peppered around the world. So our military presence is strong, ubiquitous, if you might say that, and the use of fossil fuels by this military is, as David had mentioned earlier, the use of fossil fuels, right up there with most of the country, greater than most of the countries in the world. In 2018 alone, the United States emitted 56 million metric tons of fossil fuels emission of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalents, more than the entire emissions of most countries in the world. And it's absurd when we say that we're fighting these wars for oil or water or other resources, and what we're doing is basically robbing the planet of its resources and what it needs to sustain itself. I remember, you may all remember too, that the oil fields burning in Kuwait during the first Gulf War. I still see them. I still see them on the horizon, and the smoke bellowing up from as they're burning. The forces destroyed more than 700 oil wells in Kuwait, also spilling 60 million barrels of oil. And while the oil fields in Iraq burned for months, temperatures dropped 10 degrees centigrade due to the covering of the sun, but the release of greenhouse gases into the environment had an impact long-term on rising temperatures. And over 10 million cubic meters of soil remained contaminated at least 7 years later. So we're saying we need the resources, but we're actually at a net energy loss and a loss to the environment and the environment's ability to sustain life. We can't, it's my opinion, we can't eliminate climate change if we don't eliminate wars. And we can't have, I think, Mark, you alluded to it earlier, we can't have a 350.org talking about the need to protect the environment without making a strong statement about wars. We remember way back a number of years ago, 350.org created they had a big rally and march in Washington, D.C. for climate change. It was super hot on an April day, an example of extreme temperatures early on. And they had a separate caucus for war. Problem is, after the event, when they did their recap of the event and how it went, there was not a single mention about the separate caucus for war. They talked about the environmental issues. Well, this trend continues today with the Green New Deal that the Congress is supposedly looking at. And it's a Green New Deal that has very little in it in regard to confronting the military-industrial complex. As a candidate for U.S. Senate, I followed in the footsteps of Howie Hawkins, who was our candidate for U.S. President, and called for at least a 50% reduction in military spending. If you don't call for the reduction in the military spending, or at least challenge the military-industrial complex on its spending on wars and all the other activities I mentioned, if we don't do that, we don't have anything. And if in New Jersey too, I'm running for governor this year against Governor Murphy. He said by 2030, he'd reduce the reliance, he would reduce our reliance on fossil fuels by 50%. And then by 2050, same as Joe Biden, by 2050, he would reduce it we would be at 100% renewables. Problem is, we have a strong group of young eco-socialists that work in New Jersey. They don't feel they have that kind of time. And the scientists don't feel like we have that kind of time. The scientists say we have perhaps to 2030. So if we're only going to get halfway there by 2030, then what? And if we're not going to accomplish the other half until 20 years after that, or 30 years, no, 20 years after that, then what? And if it isn't Governor Murphy or someone who's committed to it in office, then what? What we have to do is get to the source. We have to get to the biggest polluter, the biggest consumer of petroleum in the world. We have to get to the military-industrial complex. And I'm sorry, some people want us to green the military, and I reject that. I think it's like the idea of, many of us have already seen it. We have a landfill that's been polluting in our state for years and years, and they cap it, it's capped by the authorities, and then a park is built over the top of it. You can't really cover over that pollution. And you can't, by saying we're greening the military, cover over the pollution. I mean, the biggest Superfund sites in New Jersey, many of them are associated with military bases. Stuff leaking into the aquifer, or DuPont that provided munitions for some of the military, or Diamond Shamrock in Newark that produced Agent Orange for the military. And, DuPont in Pompton Lakes has, detonated many bombs, and the whole area is polluted, and it's taking forever. And it will take forever. It's impossible to clean it up. So we have to put all of this together in order to actually make a difference. And we can't say today, oh, I'm concerned about the environment today, and then next week say, oh, I'm concerned about ending the war. We have to talk about them in the same breath every time we talk about it. Someone told me, when Greta Thunberg was really making waves, that, I shouldn't talk about the military and cutting the military, the budget of the military, or ending wars, because people weren't ready to hear that yet. They only wanted to talk about climate change. Well, we're running out of time. The people in the Young Eco-Socialists say that to me all the time. They have a sense of urgency that many of us perhaps do not. So I'll just end by saying that, we also have to look at the use of depleted uranium all around the world. We use tons and tons of it in Iraq, and in Kosovo we used it, Bosnia and Kosovo. Once upon a time, I had the figures in my head as to just how much of that we'd used, and I don't at this moment. But depleted uranium, the aerial spraying of glyphosates, that may be renewed in Colombia. That the peace accords. This is a direct tie-in. 2016 peace accords. Supposed to find an alternate crop so that glyphosates would not be necessary. Now Joe Biden, author of Plan Colombia, right, he's saying to Colombia, start aerial spraying of glyphosates again, which means that entire areas will be polluted with the components of the glyphosates. And it's directly in opposition to what the peace accord said. So you can't separate. This is why it's my belief you can't separate the issues of war from the issues of climate change. And if we do, we're only doing it at our own peril. And so I would end with, we have a lot to answer for, and only by recognizing the link between the military and climate change and speaking it over and over again, not even if you're talking about ending wars, you have to talk about climate change. And if you're talking about climate change, you have to talk about ending wars. That's the only way we'll raise awareness enough, I believe, to actually deal with both sides of this big problem and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Madelyn. And, it might be good for Delilah and David to unmute themselves, because this is going to be the opportunity for people to make questions or comments. If you could post them in chat. I don't quite see a question yet. So I'll throw out a question to David and Delilah and Madelyn. Now you listen to each other. Is there anything you'd like to comment about what somebody else would say? And then also short term with the Biden administration, do you think any chance that the Biden will actually understand better the link between climate and the military?
If it's okay, I'll go ahead and add my comments. So a lot of the discussions around climate change are to continue peace and to have a green future, and they use all these buzzwords that they seem to garner support from without any actual concrete policies to back up those words that they keep using. And at this point, Madelyn's right, and so are the socialists. We don't have that time. We don't have the luxury of time to wait to address the crises that is climate change and our military occupation all over half the globe.
Well, I agree with virtually everything everybody has said here, and I've learned a great deal and appreciated listening to Delilah and to Madelyn. I always like to focus on anything I can possibly disagree with, and I can only think of one thing. It's just very small, although in a certain sense it's very huge, and that is this goddamn $6.4 trillion figure, which, the cost of war project is just so terrific, and they do just such volumes of incredibly great work, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. But these reports, that in the latest one that everybody parrots with the $6.4 trillion spent on wars in the past 20 years, I have a real problem with it, because when the US government is spending $1.25 billion every year on wars and war preparations, to take a little fraction of it and say that's the cost of the wars, it sort of normalizes, sort of makes routine all the rest, the majority of the military spending, as if, well, that's just normal, even though there's not another country on the planet that does anything remotely resembling it. It's just normal, it's just routine, but it's that little bit of it that's the cost of the wars. So in a certain sense, Who cares? Nobody can imagine even what 6.4 trillion is. It's just ginormous number, end of story. Who cares which ginormous number it is? But it actually matters because of the incredible, unfathomable things we could do with a fraction of $1.25 trillion every year. With less than 1% of it, you can end the lack of clean drinking water on the planet. With 2 or 3% of it, you can end starvation on the planet. We have these proposals now from the Biden administration to spend trillions of dollars on things like infrastructure. And it matters where that comes from, right? And Biden's theory is, well, it'll just come from a teeny tiny increase in corporate taxes that will cover the next infrastructure bill between now and 2036, as if there's not going to be anything to spend any money on between now and 2036 after this bill. So it matters the incredible amount of money that's going into militarism and what we could do by moving it to human and environmental needs. To answer your question, Mark, or to try to begin to answer your question, Biden has been just hideously awful thus far. The proposal from him for military spending is essentially that Donald Trump got it almost exactly right, just needed to be a teeny bit more. That's Biden's position on military spending. And there is not a single member of the United States Congress. I mean, there are dozens of them who say they'd like lower military spending. There may be over 100 of them who will vote for an amendment for less military spending as long as it's guaranteed to fail. But there's not a single member of the US Congress who has made a commitment to vote against increased or maintained military spending. Not a single one. Even though it's quite possible that a relatively small number of them could block a bill in the House if the Republicans vote against a bill for some crazy reason, right? And then you don't need the Senate. But not a single one of them. And the Green New Deal, Biden's against it. And the proponents of it, the progressive Congress members, the squad members, their Green New Deal isn't even a bill to do anything. It's a resolution expressing sentiments. That's it. And we're supposed to work our asses off to pass that, despite the fact that there's no effort being made to allow the passage of anything through the Senate. So we have a long ways to go. I can't comment on what Biden is going to understand. I don't have much interest in what, he understands, but what he's going to do, if it's going to be what we need done and what the planet needs done, and, forget national security, human security, earth security, depends on moving him dramatically from where he is.
Could I answer?
Sure. Okay.
Sure. No, you want to go first? I could.
If you answer that question, I had a follow-up question and a comment. So you go first.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, first of all, I'm glad that the disagreement with me was over something where I underestimated the total spending, not overestimated it. So, it's bad enough, the 6.7 trillion, and I know that was conservative. But the other thing that we have not mentioned yet is the nuclear weapons program and the trillions that are going to be invested, that have already been invested in that, and the fact that the United States ignores the international treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which went into effect in January and literally made nuclear weapons illegal. Any use, any research, any development, any quote unquote modernization, it was all made illegal, but the United States and other nuclear powers are looking the other way. And so I would say, that's another part of what I think needs to happen. I think the Senate needs to take a look at it. I think the Senate needs to bring the United States around. and into compliance with it. And I'll just say one last thing. The Democrats and Republicans are owned by the military industrial complex. I don't care how many times we say it. I don't care how many times we say we've got to move Biden or whomever it is in the White House to the left. If we're moving to the left right now, we're going back to where Obama was in 2016, and that's simply not far enough. It doesn't challenge our reliance on war, our over-reliance on war, the militarization of our economy, the militarization of the world economy. And I would say, that's why I'm a Green. That's why I run for office as a Green, because I don't have any faith in any of our Democratic Party or Republican Party leaders to do what is necessary. Thank you, Mark.
And don't go far, Madelyn. What I was going to just note was that, of course, the Green Party in the United States, though admittedly we appropriated idea from the Green Party in Europe, the Green Party in the United States were the first ones to call for a Green New Deal in 2010, particularly with Howie Hawkins' race for governor. And eventually, 8-9 years later, the Democrats picked it up. And a lot of difference about ours was much faster and more eco-socialist. But a major difference, which is seldom talked about, is that the Green New Deal, the Greens, focus on a 50% cut in the military budget as one of the ways to pay, for the Green New Deals. To some Greens say 50% cut's not enough, but at least start with that 50% cut. And I know Code Pink, when AOC and others joined, our effort to call for a Green New Deal, they actually started a petition drive to try to get those, liberal Democrats, progressive Democrats to be willing to link the need to cut the military budget and military spending to the Green New Deal. And unfortunately, they've not been successful so far at that. But there was a question posted from Madelyn, our first question. I heard you mention depleted uranium and isophates, but I think you mentioned another chemical. This was from David Hassel. If so, what was it called?
Okay, I think you were mentioning glyphosates. Were you? Because that's the, that's Monsanto's Roundup product, and that's glyphosates or glyphosatos if you're in Latin America. That's what is being used on avocados and other products. We really need to prevent the aerial spraying of it because of its impact on the land, its impact on the water. And Delilah talked about the indigenous of Bolivia, particularly indigenous in Colombia, would also be extremely negatively affected by aerial spraying of glyphosates. So that's where I'll type it in the chat. I think that was the only other chemical I mentioned. It's like isophates, but it's really glyphosates or glyphosatos.
An additional comment in the chat, which David responded to in chat, but Delilah says she also wants to speak to. So I'll let you choose which one of you goes first. But dealing with the issue of how do you deal with the tremendous costs and waste of the American overseas military bases.
Would you like to go first, Delilah? You're muted. Shall I go first since you're muted?
Whatever you want to do.
Oh, go ahead. You want to go?
Well, I don't have a website to link, but the question, how does one begin to unravel the knot of shrinking and ultimately eradicating the empire of overseas bases at the very least? Can't even begin to decrease those carbon emissions involved with base operations without having a plan to close those bases. That was from Jerome. My opinion on that is that if we don't have the support of our service members to shut down these bases and move towards domestic issues, that we won't ever see it happening, because the beast that is the American military is overfunded and overgunned and outmatched, and like every other military in existence doesn't have the budgets that we have and the bases. So if we don't have the support of our members that are enlisted, I don't see us getting very far. So that's my answer. Thanks.
I guess my answer differs a little bit. Not that I am predicting success in closing all the bases this week, but if you go to that link, worldbeyondwar.org/bases, you'll find, I believe, among other things, a link to a long list of successes in getting bases closed and preventing the construction of bases. Of course, there's an even longer list of failures, but it is possible. And the Biden administration is supposedly, I would trust them as far as I could throw them, doing a review now of, the supposed justification of each and every base. And of course, there's not a single one justified by anything. There's been a bill from Congresswoman Omar to do just that, to create, to demand that the Pentagon present a supposed justification every year for every base. But that bill has come nowhere near to becoming law. But the recent success of people in Montenegro of preventing the construction of a NATO base is just a wonderful story of community nonviolent direct action. There's a campaign that World Beyond War is working on to prevent the construction of a new base by Indonesia. There's incredible activism happening, as has been for years, in places like Okinawa and dozens of places around the world. And these are campaigns that benefit tremendously from solidarity in the United States. When you've got people in the United States and people in the location of the base that exists or is proposed, it's much more powerful than one of those two alone. It's still very, very likely to fail, but it's something that we're learning a lot of lessons, and there is a growing movement around opposing these bases. And there's not any big constituency in the US public for these bases, but there's not a massive mobilized, active, energetic movement to close them either. And of course, that's not very acceptable in the US corporate media. I would quibble with calling people who participate, some with the best intentions, most with the lack of any other alternatives what to do with their lives, in the biggest mass murder operation on the planet as providing a service. I would not use the term service member to describe someone who participates in such a thing. And I certainly would not condone deferring to members of the military on whether the military should be scaled back. This is not a recipe for success. And I think there are huge numbers of people, even in the top ranks of the US military, who think, including the immediate former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who have said, we don't need any of these bases, for their own nefarious purposes. They can do all the evil they want to do without the bases. But there's bureaucracy, there's profit, there's the desire to control these other countries with these bases, with the weapons, with the trainers and the repairers and the parts and maintenance for the weapons. It's not something that's going to go away anytime soon, but I think it's entirely possible to do away with it, regardless of what an opinion poll within the U.S. military tells us.
Delilah, looks like you had a point you wanted to make.
Yes. Well, so I have more faith in people who are enlisted for reasons, just normally people enlist because they want to provide for their family, and they're just as blue collar as anyone. But the biggest thing that I see being an issue is the private contracts and how profitable war is for the American and our government. So it's more or less about the corporate law that I see the problem happening. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay.
And I would like to add something very, very short, Mark, and that is that there is an international coalition for the closure of U.S. foreign military bases. It was organized about 2 years ago, has had a couple of international conferences. A lot of support for the people in Okinawa who've been trying to prevent the construction of a military base there. So I don't have the link handy, but I'll write the name of the organization in the chat so people want to see more. But I think we need to work at it from all ends, and by all means, if there are service members who want to stop, who want to work towards closure of military bases or understand how they're being used in the big global scheme, that their support would be more than welcome.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. So I'm going to finish up with one question, and maybe everybody could take 2 minutes as sort of a closing goodbye, what's my webpage to look at, and most importantly, what are next steps. But Comrade Alice Slater, I worked with a lot when I was down in New York City. I'd like to point out that there is a big campaign to get senators and Congress members to support the new ban treaty. I think she's talking about nuclear weapons. See www.usnuclearban.org. If anybody wants to briefly, respond to the issue of the effort to try to ban nuclear weapons, and then we can have each of you, give a short closing statement.
Sure. Who should go first?
Well, I think you may be the nuclear weapons guy, so go ahead.
Well, having done a webinar on that topic yesterday, it is somewhat fresh in my mind, and Alice provided a link to nuclearban.us. Also, if you go to worldbeyondwar.org/online and you find all of our online actions, you can find a form to quickly email your Miss Representative and 2 senators in one click, urging them. But you can also have more success getting your states and cities and counties to sign on and pass resolutions and support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The United States is also, by the way, actually a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which it routinely violates both in failing to move with all deliberate speed to abolish nuclear weapons and in locating nuclear weapons in other countries, which is, they claim they're still US weapons, they just happen to be in other countries. Well, that's a violation, arguably, and many people do argue it, of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the fact that all of these other countries, thus far, all non-nuclear countries, have created this treaty to ban even the possession of nuclear weapons is incredible and needs to be promoted, needs to be expanded and advanced, and is serving as a model already for a campaign launched this past week to ban drones, to ban armed drones. If you go to bankillerdrones.org, you'll see that new effort to get a global treaty to do that. And of course, the worst offenders are the ones you're going to get last when you create a new treaty. But I think it's very much worth doing. And if you want to find that global coalition on closing all foreign military bases, which, by the way, 95% of foreign military bases are US foreign military bases. This is not a normal thing. Most other countries don't have bases in everybody else's country. You can go to that link I provided, worldbeyondwar.org/bases, and then click on no foreign base. There's a link to noforeignbases.org, which is that coalition. And all the to-do items that I had in my PowerPoint, you can find also at the top article currently at worldbeyondwar.org or davidswanson.org or warisacrime.org.
So Delilah, Madelyn, you want to say a closing
Sure.
statement?
Sure, I will. I mean, I think we have to take to the streets to be anti-war. We were anti-war in 2003 before the invasion of Iraq. We had millions around the world out in the streets against that war. We continue to try to revitalize that kind of movement, but we have to. And I also think, and I haven't heard anybody really say this, so I don't think this crowd is someone I have to say this to. We have to get out of the Trump-Biden duopoly and get into the military-industrial complex owned by both or owning both the Democrats and Republicans. And we have to just put the issues out there as they stand, as they are, in a nonpartisan manner. And I know I was very much involved in the international treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The majority of the world's population, is against war, as we saw in February of 2003. If the right vehicle is folks. And we have to look at all these wars as interconnected, not one in Yemen and one in Syria and one over here. They're all interconnected. We need to oppose them all. And then the majority of the world understands the dangers of nuclear weapons. But for some reason, you know that term, American exceptionalism, we feel we're above the law. And, you know, this was an Obama thing in an exchange for a nuclear arms treaty. It was an Obama thing to get people to vote for it, to say we're going to make our nuclear weapons arsenal bigger, badder, more powerful than it was even at the height of the Cold War. So as soon as we get out, the sooner we get out of thinking Democrat, Republican, Trump, Biden, and think military-industrial complex has to be attacked wherever we can find a weak link, the better off we're going to be. And that's why I feel the Green Party is the place to be. Thanks.
Delilah.
Yeah, I just, no arguments there. I too am involved heavily with the Green Party, and I'm glad to be so. I think that when you hear rhetoric like we're fighting for the soul of the nation, I think what we're fighting is the corruption of the soul of the nation via the military-industrial complex. And if we cannot get ourselves to talk more about it with everybody that we know about how we could do better, then we're not going to. We're just going to keep making the same mistakes. So I have a lot of faith, some might even say naivety, in regards to the power of the people, but I still believe in us, and I think that we can make a difference.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, particularly David, Madelyn, and Delilah. This was a joint presentation of the EcoAction Committee and the Green Peace Action Committee. So particularly people who want to work on peace issues, GPAC's got a webpage would be good to go to. We'll also go to our website for gp.org, and there'll be a link to that. Obviously, the EcoAction Committee focused a little bit more on climate change. We were helping with Howie Hawkins, does his on Tuesday at 8 p.m. does a regular Zoom, and this week he's going to focus on nuclear and climate change. We've asked author Harvey Wasserman's going to be joining Howie, as well as somebody here from New York, Marilyn Ellie, who's been leading the fight to shut down the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which has happened. So congratulations to Marilyn and to others. And also, this is part of Earth Day to May Day, and we do hope that people will check out EcoAction or the gp.org website, EcoAction or our Facebook page. There are a number of other events that are coming up in the next, between now and May Day, and we do want to draw the connection. This has been live streamed on our Green Party Facebook page, not the EcoAction Facebook page, but the Green Party Facebook page. For those of you who want to go and look at this again, you can go to the Facebook page shortly and be able to see that, but we'll send out the link once it is done. And please check out everybody's website for more information, and keep in touch. I know EcoAction, after the Green Day to Earth Day to May Day, we'll be trying to find ways for people to volunteer and become more active, particularly around the Green New Deal and trying to get some real climate stimulus coming out of Congress. So thank you very much.